Salutations, fantasy enthusiasts. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Besbris. Today we're talking the Minnesota Timberwolves as we continue our NBA around the world tour until something more interesting pops up, and then we'll do that instead. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Besbris. Please hit that like button, YouTubers. Subscribe, however you're taking in the content. That's the big one, of course. And then if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, a rating of 5 stars would go a long way. I'm also very proud to introduce my new favorite t-shirt. This is the Frosted Pop-Tart shirt. It brings us great joy. Also, don't get it twisted. This hat is for Hebrew National Hot Dogs. It was given to me by a food and beverage manager at a minor league baseball team because he knew that I was a Hebrew. Let's talk basketball. We're going to start by looking at the Wolves, basically the entirety of the roster, just for a second, not for too long. Minnesota, a solid season last year, 49-33, had a pretty good little playoff run where they took care of the Lakers. They were not really overwhelming in any one statistical category, but kind of found their way as the season went on. They got tougher and tougher as they got healthier and figured out how the pieces fit. A testament really to Chris Finch, because on paper, the pieces really didn't look like they fit all that well. And yet, they kind of found a way. No massive shifts for the Wolves season over season. They did lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That's probably the biggest offseason change because the top 7 players on this Wolves team are effectively the same. And we'd be remiss if we didn't start our discussion of Minnesota with, of course, the tip of the spear, Anthony Edwards, who made a leap last year. There's no doubt about it. I admit that I was skeptical that he could get to whatever that next level in fantasy might be. And he got there thanks to jacking up 3-pointers at a ridiculous rate. Because if you remember, and apologies, everybody, my voice is completely shot to hell from another weekend of Little League baseball coaching. So if it cracks or squeaks, now you know why. Last season, not this most recent year, the 23-24 season, Ant-Man was number 37 in 9 category leagues. He averaged 26 points, 5.5 boards, 5 assists, 1.3 steals, half a block on 46-84 splits. This most recent season, he got up to 27.5 points, which was a thing. But the big one, because the steals, the blocks, the field goal, the free throw, the rebounds, the assists, like all that stuff was almost exactly the same year over year. The big jump for Anthony Edwards and what pushed him up to that next tier of player was the 3-pointers, which went from 2.5 to over 4 a game. Again, like 1.8 combined defensive stats last year. I believe he was at 1.8 exactly this season. Yeah, 1.8. Assists were ever so slightly down. Rebounds were ever so slightly up. You know, an extra 2 points per game, that's fine, but that's not a big difference maker. It's that 3-pointer number, which went from a little bit above league average to basically the best in the league. He and Steph Curry were kind of neck and neck almost the entire season. Malik Beasley and all of his legal stuff going on was up there with those guys. Brandon Miller before he got hurt, LaMelo Ball before he got hurt. But those are the guys that were up around 4 a game. Steph ended up passing Ant as his number went up, and Edwards slowly ticked down, but down only to 4.1. So Anthony Edwards turned one statistical category that we kind of didn't, I don't want to say we saw it coming, into his biggest win from a fantasy standpoint. Like the biggest positive impact category for Ant was 3-pointers this last year. And we've seen what having that elite category can do for your overall fantasy ranking. And that's exactly what it did for him. The best example, of course, is, Dyson Daniels, who was so hyper elite in one category that it pushed him all the way up into the second round. Anthony Edwards wasn't quite that same story. He was, very good in scoring and serviceable in 4 or 5 things. And he was a small positive in free throws. So there were other things that he did well. But the big leap in 3-pointers was the big reason that he became sort of that bona fide per game second round guy. The reason that Anthony Edwards is likely to go in the first round this coming season, well, there's two. The first one is one that we can say about everybody near the top of the board, and that's with 2 to 3 or 4 other first and second rounders out for the year. Everybody gets a 2 to 4 slot bump up, which doesn't sound like a lot if you were ranked at 90 and you started going at 86. But it is a big deal if you were ranked 12 and start going at 8 or whatever. And that's not how it's going to be this year. They're not 4 first rounders out. But Anthony Edwards is going to be a first rounder for that reason. And the other one is that his durability has been really outstanding. And we'll scroll down just a tiny bit so the YouTubers can take a look at it. He played every single game in his rookie season. He missed 10 games his second year, 3 each of the last 3 seasons. So he's missed a grand total of 9 games over the last 3 years. And in fantasy, that matters. You have to then go down and look at totals. He scored 2,200 points this year, 91 steals, 51 blocks, 323 pointers. Totals really are important at the top of the fantasy draft board. They're not as important for a guy who's ranked 120th. And we've talked about like the totals bump, whether it's real or fake. And the answer is both, depending on how good the player was each day. Anthony Edwards was a second rounder this year each day. So if you get a second round per game guy that's playing every damn night, his overall ranking becomes really, really good. So Ant was number 6 by totals this year, which very much beat his ADP, even though on the per game side, he didn't. He was slightly behind his ADP per game, but he was above it by totals. And that stuff matters. It's the kind of player that is not the easiest dude to build your team around because he doesn't have those, 3 great categories. Like, it's probably easier to build a team around Trae Young than Anthony Edwards, which seems insane because Ant was ranked so much higher than him this year. But Trae Young, if you're punting turnovers and punting field goal or whatever, those guys are ended up neck and neck in the rankings, punting those two things, because they were both not outstanding at it. But with Trae Young, you have the big assist jump, you have the big free throw jump, you get not quite as much scoring, but almost as much, not quite as many threes, but like you got the same number of steals. I'm not saying I'm taking Trae Young over Anthony Edwards. I'm just saying that there's like a type of player to build around and it's a little bit easier. Still, all of that stuff mushed together in a cauldron. Anthony Edwards, because of how durable he was, Trae Young, by the way, also pretty damn durable this year, was the higher ranked guy and a safe play, a safe guy to build your team around, even without those elite categories. Like, it's hard for me to look at you guys square in the eye and say, take Anthony Edwards over, I don't know, who is a good example of this from this past year? Anthony Davis? Anthony Edwards versus Anthony Davis. How about that? What do you do? It's not an easy decision because AD's per game ranking is almost definitely going to be way out in front. But Anthony Davis missed 30 games this year. Tried to play through a lot of stuff. Didn't really work. Now, because he was so good per game, his overall totals rank was not all that bad. But Edwards obviously beat him by quite a bit, actually. Anyway, so that's Anthony Edwards. He's going to be a mid to late first round pick, and that's where he belongs. Oh, yes, Bet Online continues to be your number one source for all sports betting action. I knew I was forgetting something. These long weekends, they really take my brain apart. Baseball rolling along. My poor Dodgers can't win a game to save their lives right now, but baseball is happening, and they're hosting the Minnesota Twins at a minus 160 home favorite. Can they actually get it going? Shohei's starting tonight. You can also bet on tennis, soccer, UFC and mixed martial arts, football, boxing. Those are just the popular ones. They got ones that are less popular as well. There's a Iran-Egypt basketball friendly going on right now that you can get down on. Egypt's up 5. They're a minus 625 money line favorite in live betting. I mean, really, like, you could lose your mind with this stuff. But there's a ton of tennis going on right now. A bunch of soccer going on. Like we mentioned, there's an international basketball game happening right now. You got the WNBA with a bunch of player props. Baseball's got player props. There's just so many ways to get down, including all that. Latest odds, news, scores, sports wagering info, and a live casino. BetOnline has a casino with live casino action. You've also got casino games like poker and blackjack. And if you head to BetOnline today, you can take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program, level up bonuses, and weekly cash boosts, all included. BetOnline, the game starts here. The next Minnesota Timberwolf that we're going to talk about is Rudy Gobert, who's coming off a decidedly average season in almost every respect. He was number 62 on a per-game basis. He missed 10 games, which is right around the fantasy average of players that were relevant this past year. 12 points, 11 rebounds, 2.2 defensive stats, good field goal. Free throw was not good, but better than usual for Rudy. He was about 3% higher than his career mark. And the big story on Gobert is that his role is just slowly shrinking. And some of that has to do with the big-time emergence of Nas Reed. Some of it is just, Rudy's been in the NBA for a decade now. He's not an old GOAT necessarily, but he's 33. He's on the wrong side of prime, especially for a big man. So I wouldn't go into next year assuming that Gobert is about to do more. He took the fewest number of shots since his third season in the NBA when he was just beginning to get starters minutes back with the Utah Jazz at 7.1. The rebounds at 10.9 was one of the lowest of his entire career as well. The blocks at 1.4, also among the lowest of his career, very close to his first season in Minnesota when he was only playing 30 and a half minutes per game. I will say the one thing you could look at with Rudy and say there's a chance that this number might get a little bit better would be the defensive stats, because 2.2 basically ties his career low, including the early parts of his career, not his rookie year when he played 9 minutes a game, but like since he's played any kind of meaningful minutes, this ties the lowest mark. And some of it is situation, because the other time was also in Minnesota in his first year with the Wolves, so 3 seasons back. But then last year he had 2.8 combined. So, miscellaneous shot blocking fluctuations could come into play this coming year. You might see that number come back up a little, but I don't think I would bank on it. I do think that you can pretty safely bank on Rudy being, like in that 80 range on the 9-cat side, and maybe he goes a little higher than that, like this year, because the free throw was a tiny bit better than usual, and everything else stayed about the same. So I'm not about to use, a top 50 pick on Gobert. I think there's more interesting centers to throw in there. But in that next chunk of centers, he seems like a very safe play where you know the floor and you also basically know the ceiling. Speaking of 2014, 2014 Lakers draft pick, Julius Randle is the next name on our Minnesota Timberwolves list of players to peruse. He was number 120 this last year. Still has a lot of the same issues he's had throughout his career, although much like Gobert, had a very good free throw shooting season this last year. And unlike there was really no tie. I don't have a good segue here. Randle also had his best field goal shooting year really since he became more of a three-point chucking type. Yes, his usage was way down in Minnesota, but the efficiency was way up. It's one of those scenarios where maybe the usage will... It's still not a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Usage is value. It just is. If you look at Randle's numbers over his career, the previous season in New York, he actually had a lower 9 category ranking, but that was largely because he had 3.5 turnovers a game. Everything else, you take the good with the bad from the year before. Yes, Randle's field goal percent was 1% lower, and the free throw percent was 2.5% less. But the rebounds his last year in New York, 2 rebounds more, half an assist, almost 5 and change more points per game. You take that, even if the efficiency is a tiny bit worse. Still, at least this gave those Randle believers, I'm not one of them, but it gave Randle believers an opportunity to sort of escape with their clothing this year. But Julius, to me, is not a guy that you should be targeting in 9-category drafts. He has holes in his game that were slightly washed out this year because his shooting was so much better than usual or expected. But I don't know that you can assume that's going to happen again. And with the big usage dip, the rebounds down, the assists down, the scoring down, the threes actually were almost the same, but that's just because his three-point shooting percentage was a little bit better this season again. This was probably, from just an overall standpoint, almost, I want to say as good as it gets, because like maybe he could play an extra minute or two. Let's say everybody around him got hurt. In that instance, you probably see Randall play more like 34 minutes instead of 32, and that's how numbers could get a little bit better. 8-cat, he has a chance to squeak inside the top 100. He got there this year, I believe. I'm going to triple check myself on Julius Randle's 8-cat rank. Yeah, he was like number 90-ish in 8-cat. But because he scores and rebounds and assists, he's generally going to go earlier than the rankings would indicate. I think he's more of a build type, punt steals, punt turnover, possibly even. I mean, he's not a punt free throw guy anymore, but he makes sense as a big man who passes that doesn't block shots because he does have center eligibility on some websites. So Randall, more of a fit guy, probably not someone that I'm going to end up drafting, and feel free to follow along if you so choose. Jaden McDaniels, well, finally, this was we've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and it was very much. I taught my son this expression: "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." And with Jaden McDaniels, we were at "Fool me 4 times, shame on me," and then all of a sudden, he fooled us the other way, where he started playing better this season, and I think we all, like fantasy-wise, we were all kind of in the boy who cried wolf scenario of like, yeah, I know, here's 2 good weeks from Jaden McDaniels again, but he's literally done the 2 good weeks thing 15 times over the prior 3 years. It happened, and it happened, and it happened, and by the 15th time, we stopped believing. We're like, yeah, we know, but like, check back with me in 7 games, because then the other shoe's going to drop, and the whole, the bottom of the bowl is going to break loose. But then all of a sudden this year, we saw the breakthrough. McDaniels was more involved offensively. He took 10.2 shots per game this year, which is a full 1.1 higher than any prior season. Free throw shooting got better. He was at 81% this year. Rebounding went way up. Some of that was more playing time, but a lot of it was just better rebounding. Career high 4.2 defensive rebounds per game. Overall, career high of 5.7. Assists were a career high, only by a little. Steals were up from 0.9, seemingly almost every season, to 1.3. The blocks held steady at 0.9. And so everything, this sort of like rising tide, and you could say, oh, yeah, he played more minutes. But we're talking about 1 more minute than 2 seasons prior. 1 more minute does not equate to the jumps that he made. 1 more minute shouldn't have been an extra 50% in rebounding. The scoring stayed the same. So, like, you can't point to that and say that was the big difference. But the steals, the blocks were good, the rebounds were good, and the free throw was good. That was also the sort of the big jumper. So that got Jaden McDaniels up to number 76 in 9-cat. Obviously, he's going to be lower in 8-cat because he was at 1.2 turnovers per game. Now we ask ourselves, is this real? He also played all 82 games last season as well. So he was good per game, even better by totals, more valuable in head-to-head because he wasn't ranked super duper high on the year. And I'm inclined to say that I think this is a kind of on the will it hold thing. And the reason I say kind of is that we saw as the Wolves got back to full strength, Jaden McDaniels fell off the map. And it was like very much an as the season went thing. Remember, the Wolves started the year very healthy, and McDaniels wasn't really doing all that much. Then the whole team got hurt all at the same time. And so McDaniels got to do a lot. I think Dante DiVincenzo was out, and I think Randall was out for a little bit. Anthony Edwards didn't miss much time. Um, Gobert missed a little time in there. Mike Connley got some time off, but that wasn't the big one. The key all of a sudden now was, Anthony Edwards was taking almost all the shots on the team. But like if Randall misses a couple of weeks, that opens things up for somebody. And we didn't think it was going to be him, but it ended up being, at least partially, Jaden McDaniels. And you can see, like, if you look at how the season went, over the season's final, we can do fine. The second half of the year, he was top 50 on 11 and a half shots per game. So the usage just kept getting better and better and better. But what that doesn't tell you is that if you really sort of like squeeze in on it, and instead of saying, oh, the second half of the season, but instead you're looking at a date range that was like, January 1st to say like mid-March when guys started coming back for Minnesota, it was actually even better. He was number 19 over a 35-game span right in the middle of the season when everybody was out. Nas Reed was number 44 over that span when everybody was out. Not everybody, but a bunch of guys were out. But McDaniels, taking 12 shots a game, was at 15-7 with 1.5 steals, 0.9 blocks. He also shot a ridiculous 89% of the free throw line over that span, which is obviously not a sustainable number. But he was amazing. And then all of a sudden, the Wolves started getting guys back all almost at the same time. McDaniels didn't do as much down the stretch. The last month, he wasn't even on the board in ranking. He was number 164 over the last month of the year. Back to 9 shots per game because Randall was there, and Ant was there, and Gobert was there, and DiVincenzo was there, and Nas Reed was there, and Mike Connley was there, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker was there, and there just wasn't enough. He's got to get up over 10 shots per game. He has to be involved somehow because we know he can do the peripheral stuff. He can rebound, he can steal, he can block. These are fun stats to get, but there has to be enough on offense to cover up some of those deficiencies. He's not quite good enough at defensive stats and or rebounding or whatever to paper over the stuff he's bad at. So we saw it down the stretch. I think Jaden McDaniels is more like a top 100 to 120 range guy when the Wolves are fully healthy, because he also didn't shoot the ball that great down the stretch, so that probably is a number that maybe bounces back a little. But he's also not the top 25 guy he was when 3 starters were out. Would I draft him at the end of drafts? In head-to-head, absolutely, because you love the durability. You love the, just accruing some of the harder-to-find stats. Roto, probably not. Let's go to one of my favorite fantasy players on earth, and that's Nas Reed. And I realize that, I've cart before the horse and all that stuff. Because Nas, much like Jaden McDaniels, was also not very good down the stretch when the Wolves got fully healthy. And as we also talked about, was very good when the Wolves were not super healthy. In fact, Nas Reed even had a stretch in there where he was like a top 20 guy. But mostly, if you point and say, okay, when were DiVincenzo and Randall out at the same time, that was when Nas Reed was a top 40 player. So there was a stretch there where he was averaging like 17-7 with 1.7 defensive stats, 3 threes a game. He was a 48% shooter from the field. He was over 80 at the foul line. Everything was coming up Nas. But at the same time, we have to be pragmatic. I was high on Nas Reed coming into the year. The footnote on that was this is a guy who I think can be like a top 115 player when the team is fully healthy. And if anyone bigger than Mike Connley has to miss a game, then Nas gets to do more, and that's how he's going to get a bunch of games where he's a top 75 guy, and it's going to balance out. And that's basically what happened, but slightly more like polar extremes, where he was not as good when the team was fully healthy as expected, but he was way better when the team wasn't fully healthy because the injuries happened clustered. I think what I thought was going to happen was there'd be like a staggering, like Gobert would miss a dozen games, and Nas would be pretty good for that stretch. And then at some other time in the year, Randall would miss a dozen games, and Nas would be pretty good during that stretch. And then maybe Anthony Edwards would miss a day or two, and maybe Jaden McDaniels would miss a day or two. And like all of these would roll up to Nas Reed having like 40 or 50 games where one guy was out and he was better. And instead, it was like 40 games where the team was 100% healthy and like actually maybe even more than that. And like 20 games where one guy was out and he was fine. And then like 20 games where three guys were out and Nas went nuts. So we didn't get to this endpoint exactly the way we thought. We weren't that far off, but he finished at 96. Also very durable this year. Nas Reed played in 80 out of 82 regular season games. He ended up as a really, really good head-to-head pick. He ended up as kind of a meh Roto pick because what's a top 100 guy on Roto other than a little bit of a placeholder? But top 55 by totals, that's very useful on the head-to-head side. The Wolves had 4 guys that actually fit that bill. We've talked about them already. They were by and large a pretty healthy basketball team, other than I guess you'd say Dante DiVincenzo was like the one rotation player who missed a bunch of basketball games, but most of the key guys were there. So I guess the other thing is if you're looking at next year and you say, well, could the Wolves be a little bit more banged up? Would that be good for Nas Reed? Yeah, but also it's possible that guys like Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels are just guys who play games. Sometimes that happens. Like Jaden McDaniels hasn't missed many games in his NBA career. 9, 12, 3, 10, and 0. That might just be who he is. Nas Reed's been unbelievably healthy for 2 seasons running. He's missed 3 games over the last 2 years. So again, probably a guy I take as a little bit of a sleeper play on the head-to-head side. And I'd like to go a little bit later in Roto, if at all possible. But I think he deserves to be drafted in all formats. It just comes down to when based on what he's good at, and being durable and racking up kind of semi out of position stats for a center, sort of semi, kind of. That's useful. Let's talk about some Wolves that had stretches last year, but overall weren't quite there. One of them, Dante DiVincenzo, he was number 121 on a per game basis this last year. Believe it or not, that's actually where he was by totals as well, despite missing 20 ball games. I don't really understand how that works out. Is that right? That doesn't seem right. How can that possibly be right? Yeah, all right, fair enough. Much like his teammates, he had a stretch where he was very good. It was, the Mike Connley's getting rest stretch, or the I think it was the Randall down stretch was also useful for Dante. But I think we can keep this handicap relatively short. He's a guy who's good at threes and steals. Those are the 2 categories he's a net positive in this past year. He was a negative in everything else other than turnovers, bad field goal, not good free throw, doesn't rebound that much. Actually, the passing was okay for Dante, but they were calling him the backup point guard, and he had 3.5 assists per game, so that's not really good per se. To me, he profiles as someone that does not need to be drafted and instead can be plucked when, say, he's starting over Connley, or let's say Ant or Jaden McDaniels has to miss a game and he slots in there as well. So we need Dante getting, a dozen shots instead of 9.5. Maybe not a dozen. 11 would probably do the trick. And again, he wasn't that far off from that number. But to me, it feels like there needs to be one guy out. So he's a 1 away. You can probably expect him to be on our draft season show about the 1 away guys. You remember that episode? We reviewed it at the end of the season. It's the guys that I feel are 1 incident. That makes it sound like it has to be a bad thing. Incident just being like player sits for a day or whatever, from being a solid fantasy play. But without something happening, I don't think he's going to be there. And then this one makes me somewhat sad, and that's Mike Connley, who was an old man squad favorite for a very long time. And unfortunately, now he's just old. He'll be 38 in October. The torch hath been passed season over season. He went from 29 minutes a game down to 25, and he just nothing clicked this last year. He didn't make any shots. He shot 40% from the field. His assists went down from 6 to 4.5. And if you're not getting the efficient assists and threes, then there's no point. So the Connley era sadly came to an end this past year. They had a nice long run there where he was just squeezing out old man value. And sometimes it's hard to know when that the we're gonna tip over the edge into too old. Some guys make it very obvious, like Kyle Lowry. It was very obvious that he had just gotten too old, and so we were kind of able to get out in front of that one. Conley, not as much. He was a guy that I drafted in the 120s, 130s this past year, so like an 11th, 12th, 13th round pick, and he didn't pan out. And I gave him a long time too, which ended up being too long. But he's just getting phased down. Julius Randle being around and Dante DiVincenzo. Honestly, both guys that they picked up in that trade with the Knicks that sent Cat out, who, yeah, pretty good passer, but they brought in two guys that were going to do more ball handling, and that just meant less for Conley, who I still think has a really important presence on the team, but it's just not on the floor anymore. So that one's a nope. Nope. And that, as we roll back into the you just look at my dumb face part of the proceedings on YouTube, is the Minnesota Timberwolves breakdown. Anthony Edwards should be a mid to late first rounder. Rudy Gobert should probably go somewhere near 65 to 75, where he finished up this past season. Julius Randle, not a guy you want to target in 9 cat. 8 cat, you could probably go around 100. Jaden McDaniels is someone in head-to-head, I would probably take near the end of drafts. Roto, I don't know that I'm taking that plunge. Maybe more of a guy that you plug and play if you're going to draft him in Roto. Nas Reed, honestly, similar to Jaden McDaniels with a slightly different fantasy stat set. He's a guy that I think you can look at late in head-to-head leagues, probably somewhere in that 100 to 120 range. Roto, you probably look more towards the back end of that. Head-to-head, you could probably look a little bit more towards the front end. And then DiVincenzo and Mike Conley are guys that I would look at as maybe dudes you think about on the wire. Dante, certainly. Conley, probably not. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button on the way out. Tomorrow, we'll dig into another basketball team because that's what we're doing right now. I'm Dan Vespers for the Old Man Squad. Lots of stuff coming up around here. Please, please, please do make sure to subscribe to the network because we got shows from Noah on the Dynasty side. Kingy still in the States, so no shows from Kingy over the last little bit, but he said he's going to be cranking out stuff in about the next week to week and a half. We are also going to be introducing some new show hosts, but I don't want to roll those out at the very end of this episode. I want to give them a little bit more fanfare. But again, a lot of reasons to sub here on YouTube. We're going to have a lot of shows rolling your way. We'll separate them into playlists, so if there's one analyst you like more than another, awesome. Enjoy us all if that fits your bill as well. Have a great Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the week. I'm Dan. I'll see you tomorrow.